Ewan Patterson, some crazy news dropped last night. In fact, low-key the craziest that's ever happened to me personally since I've been at this job. And I've seen Microsoft buy Activision, which
I've seen things you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen things you wouldn't believe. And yet this one has blown my brain more than a $70 billion acquisition. If you did not know, last night Sony pulled Concord, the latest blockbuster from the studio, the hero shooter that has been shown off right behind us, from sale. And not only did it pull it from sale, but it's refunded every player who has bought into it, which by all accounts wasn't that many to begin with, but we'll get to that. And they've issued refunds to everyone, no matter whether they bought it on PlayStation or on Steam. Now, this is unprecedented. We have seen games pulled from sale before. We've seen Sony issue refunds, but more often than not, on the few occasions that's happened, it's because the game itself has been busted or mismarketed. You'll probably remember when Cyberpunk 2077 was pulled from sale, and that was because it was broken, because
busted.
It didn't
I think
work.
Busted more, that was
busted.
great.
Hey man, busting makes you feel good, as we all know. Not in the case of Cyberpunk though. It was pulled from sale. Everyone got a refund because it was too glitchy. It didn't run. It wasn't as it was advertised. That's not the case with Concord. Concord, by all accounts, is the game that was promised. It's the exact same game that we all played in the beta. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with it. The issue here seems to be down entirely to its lack of commercial performance and the few people who actually bought it, and Sony clearly has other plans for it. Ewan, we're going to get into statements from the official blog post that Sony dropped last night. We're going to get into the sales. What were your instant reactions? Because I can't be the only person who thought this was just absolutely crazy.
When the WhatsApp notification came through yesterday when we were all wrapping up for the day, I was like, nah man, I can't deal with this level of just Concord drama. I mean, there's no previous Concord drama was pretty kind of like, oh, okay, it's the hero shooter live service game coming out in 2024. You know, when Marge starts the pretzel snack business and Homer's like, I see you desperately trying to cram one more salty snack into America's overstuffed pie hole. This is the exact same feeling. And the fact that it's been pulled, potentially there's some free-to-play rejigging, we don't know currently at this current moment in time. This feels like a real kind of turning point moment where we've had loads of it's been a year of just reckoning with the way that the industry has changed over, post-pandemic, longer development times, trend chasing, reactive kind of game development policies. Started off with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League at the beginning of the year. And we've gotten to Concord. This feels like it should be a turning point moment because this game was in development for 6 to 7 years? 8 years. Back when Overwatch was king, back when, Fortnite was still in its relative infancy, in fact 2016, so that would be before Fortnite became Battle Royale.
Just before, yeah.
So much has happened since this game entered development, and the fact that we've gotten to this point now, it should be reiterating to every single business in this industry right now that things cannot carry on the way they are currently doing. And I just feel really bad for the developers because there are some aspects of Concord I think are really, really cool. But having played it, it wasn't bringing anything unique to this market that we're all already seeing fade away in terms of popularity, given the way that Overwatch went with Overwatch 2 and everything. So yeah, it's just a big old bummer.
A big old bummer. I guess I'll get to the exact blog post because the reasonings for why Sony have pulled it are a little bit vague, and essentially it boils down to Concord not matching the expectations of players, which could mean a lot of things, but the official blog says, quote, while many qualities of the experience resonated with players, we also recognize that other aspects of the game and our initial launch didn't land the way we intended. Therefore, at this time, we have decided to take the game offline beginning September 6, 2024, and explore options, including those that will better reach our players, end quote. Now, you mentioned free-to-play there. To me, I think that's the biggest criticism around Concord right now, because as you explained, it's tough to enter a market that's already oversaturated and arguably dwindling in popularity. The people who play hero shooters kind of have their hero shooters, and more importantly, a lot of the most popular first-person multiplayer games right now are free to play. You've mentioned Overwatch there. That went free to play with Overwatch 2. Sony's own Destiny, because now it owns Bungie, also went free to play with Destiny 2. You've seen Battle Royale games like Call of Duty Warzone or Fortnite, like you mentioned, reach those audiences because they were free to play. So I can sympathize with the argument that Concord was maybe asking too much, even though it was releasing at a discounted price of £35 as opposed to $70, which is the standard pricing for Sony games. So I kind of understand that expectation, because even Call of Duty, right? Even Activision, who will charge you for everything, will love to sell you glorified DLC as full price releases.
They will.
Like Modern Warfare 3. Even they had the wherewithal to go, you know what, I think releasing something like Call of Duty Warzone, that needs to be its own thing, that needs to be free to play. Admittedly, they had to make the mistake of Call of Duty Blackout, their previous Battle Royale attempt, which they bundled with a purchase of Black Ops 4 to get to that point. But at the same time, I'm conflicted, because while I can understand the reasoning for Concord going free to play to get that larger player base, honestly, to me, on paper, the decisions that Concord made from a monetization aspect were better than the free-to-play alternative. Concord released without a paid battle pass. It was giving you weekly, high quality, by the looks of things, cutscenes that continue the story for free. It wasn't engaging in the kind of insidious practices that a lot of free-to-play games get away with because they are free-to-play, and the excuse is, well, you don't have to do it, you know, the game is open to everyone, you can play and get whatever. But I'm personally sick, and you probably are sick of hearing me talk about this, but of the way that free-to-play games and the free-to-play model have limited how we view progression in multiplayer.
You're so right.
Because
back in the day in Call of Duty, you'd get like a few DLCs or whatever, and I think the concern was that, oh, we're going to fragment the player base doing this or whatever. But really, we've gotten to a point now where multiplayer games can't just be multiplayer games. They need to be the live service that is never ending and is competing for your attention and constantly doing that. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No.
But like, I totally agree with you. It's one thing that I've wanted for so long, is a multiplayer experience that doesn't feel like your time is being railroaded into constantly committing to it and doing it over and over again. And on the $40 price point, I saw some really good kind of replies from Jason Schreier yesterday, who was just, dispelling a bunch of, misinformation and stupidity online regarding the reasons why Concord is kind of, falling on its face here. And he mentioned, Helldivers 2 worked because that had a unique hook. That $40 price point made sense because there are very few kind of like drop-in co-op game experiences that you can play and have a fun kind of time with it. Whereas with Concord, even though the monetization route, I agree with you, is way better than logging into something like Call of Duty, where you're instantly bombarded with adverts before you've even gotten past the main menu, which is just ridiculous and totally predatory, and I hate it. It's still a case of, well, Concord, beyond that, it's not providing anything unique to this particular genre. And having played the game, it wasn't for me, but I know people have kind of responded positively to the PvP aspects in certain respects. But I do think that is a killer. If you're already going into this oversaturated market and you can't find your unique in, and it seemed as if Concord's unique in was the cutscenes and the long kind of term storytelling that there was going to be every single week, that isn't enough to build fresh momentum. I think they were probably looking at the Overwatch kind of, the big trailers that came up with that, where they were explaining the hero lore and stuff, and thought, we can really sustain a game based on this. And that just hasn't proven to be the case. And it's disappointing, because I agree with you. I think we do need multiplayer games that aren't doing the free-to-play route and aren't constantly badgering you to invest in stupid currency and buy the Cheech and Chong Call of Duty add-on, which I saw advertised. I downloaded Call of Duty again for the first time in ages because I want to play the Black Ops 6 beta, and I saw that going up. And I was like, what? Where did we go?
What happened here?
Why?
I mean, you mentioned like the other games of the competition there. I think that's really important, because to me, the first thing that came to mind when I saw Concord was Lawbreakers from back in 2017. Like, that is still talked about today, not just from nerds like us who put it in every list we can about bombs that kind of went down swinging, but it's remembered as going up against Overwatch and failing. It wasn't a one-to-one comparison, but you could tell it was trying to eat its lunch while being maybe a little bit more quote-unquote mature and having that edge to try and single it out in even what was then an oversaturated market. And I was looking up some reporting, because IGN reports that analysts now are pointing towards Concord selling total in its first few days on sale around 25,000 copies, and that's between PlayStation and Steam. That is incredibly low, and they've gotten that information from the fact that it really struggled to break the 40th best-selling game on PlayStation. It struggled to break 100 on Steam, and its concurrent plays at its peak was around 700. Now, in comparison, the concurrent players for Lawbreakers at its peak was around 3,000, according to a Game Rant article from the time. So even Lawbreakers, for as maligned as that game was, for as notorious as that game was, that at least managed to break 4 figures. Concord apparently didn't even get there. It was stuck at around 700. So that's like just putting it in context of how much of a bomb this seems to be financially. I think that makes it a little bit clearer, and I think those numbers would be bad for a new indie game. Those numbers would be bad for something that didn't have 8 years of development and the backing of one of the biggest gaming companies in the world. I know it's maybe not fair to put it alongside other Sony failures in different genres. You know, your mind probably goes to something like The Order 1886, very different genres, very different markets, very different price points, but I genuinely think at this moment in time, and it pains me to say, you can call it like the biggest bomb in PlayStation history right now.
The scale of that is truly ridiculous, and I do think, you know, we mentioned at the beginning of the video, this feels like it should be a turning point. The scale of that kind of failure, it speaks to not just in terms of like Sony strategy over the last several years. I think in general people have felt kind of dissatisfied, even though there's loads of riches for us to indulge in as gamers. You know, like loads of great games coming out every single year. I think there is still that overwhelming acknowledgement and feeling that this generation has been such a letdown and hasn't really lived up to the standards of the hardware that was promised at the beginning in terms of both quantity and quality. And looking at how this has panned out, I think maybe when we look back on this era of gaming in a few years from now, we'll all be thinking, what a wasted set of years and time, and how we put all these resources into things that just did not work out. And it's frustrating that we've had a year of a lot of, well, this thing bombed and this thing didn't find an audience, and we're already hearing today that Star Wars Outlaws is underselling and underperforming Ubisoft's expectations. There is a general kind of malaise around everything at the minute, which isn't, you know, specific and hyper as detailed as the analysts actually saying, you know, it sold this X amount, but I think in general it speaks to the level of disengagement. You know, like studios and publishers are finding it way harder to galvanize audiences, and they're there. It's just the games being made are not tapping into that, and they're kind of coming through in different ways. And it is just kind of frustrating that we've had all this time spent into something like a Concord, which again, you know, there are good things about this game. There's a lot of talent and time and work that's gone into it, but would it have been better spent if, you know, Sony weren't pursuing so many live service products over the last few years? Could we have gotten something comparable to another Last of Us in a single player sense, or Spider-Man or whatever? It's just kind of, it's really frustrating, and I'm hoping that there is some level of accountability for the decision makers on top, and that the developers involved aren't going to be the ones who shoulder the burden of this, because obviously we saw this week that the developers at Rocksteady, they've already laid off a bunch of people from their QA department for Suicide Squad Killer Justice League, which again, everyone who's losing their jobs for that wouldn't have been involved in actually the decisions of making that game in the first place. The people who made that game get to go and set up another studio elsewhere and kind of not have to answer for it. So it's just gaming be better.
We could probably just end the video there and say gaming be better, but annoyingly I'm going to drag it on for a bit longer because I think you made some really good points there. You mentioned like Star Wars Outlaws and Concord, like both of those games, for my money, from what I've played of both, haven't finished Star Wars yet, but I'm enjoying my time. They're good games, but I just don't think it's enough to sell a good game anymore. You do need that, especially with development taking so long. You need to have something that is fresh and, like you said, something a bit innovative, something that catches the eye and gets people to leave the comfort of what they know for something different. Like, a lot of people can look at Outlaws and say, that's an Ubisoft game. It's a prettier Ubisoft game. It's a marginally better Ubisoft game. But what have you got? Where's the sauce that attracts me and makes me want to spend the money? It is the same with Concord. It's like, yeah, I could play this, but at the same time, Again, it's not one-to-one, but Valorant just went free-to-play on console. Maybe I'll give that a go. Maybe I'll just go back to Overwatch. It's reminded me of other stuff that I already love, and I just think it's a shame that Concord, for as good as it is, this is like, what, the first proper first-party Sony first-person shooter we've had since Killzone Shadowfall a long time ago, and it's not distinctly Sony. It feels like something you can get
10 years ago.
Completely elsewhere. Do not do that to me. 10 years ago. But you also mentioned like the studio itself, and I do want to talk about that because I really feel for Firewalk, who are the developers. They've been working on this game for 8 years. They were just acquired about a year and a half ago. I think it was April 2023. So they've only been part of the Sony first party ecosystem for a little while. I hope that they get the chance to either try to make Concord a thing or get the chance to make another game for Sony. I would hate to see a studio get purchased and then suffer layoffs or a change in direction so soon, because presumably it's Sony who bought them. It's Sony who looked at Concord and said, we want that, we believe in it. I was looking at reporting about like the future of Sony's live service slate, because it has pivoted since Jim Ryan left and we got 2 new core CEOs. It seems like there's less emphasis on it, but we are still getting games like Bungie's Marathon or Fair Games, which is coming out from, I think, Haven Studios. And there was Christopher Dring over on Game Industry Biz. I think he was writing on Reset Era, responding to some people, but he was talking about how internally anyway, Fair Games, which had a similar reception to Concord in terms of its trailer, it looked alright, but it didn't look like anything special. Apparently internally there is a lot of promise for that game. And I believe that. I believe that they are excited about it. But I also believe that they were excited about Concord. You don't buy a studio, you don't invest in an IP this much, put it in state of players, put this much backing behind it, if you didn't internally think it was going to be a success. It's not something they were lumped with. It's something they choose to pursue. So because of that reason, I mean, you don't even need that reasoning, but that's why I think, Firewalk, I think, should be given another chance, because they've done everything, quote-unquote, right. They have, in my mind, delivered what Sony wanted, and then it's Sony who's kind of changed their mind. I just want to go back briefly to the free-to-play thing, just because my speculation is they've pulled it so soon to re-release it as free-to-play in a way that doesn't burn the people who bought it. I think if they could have maybe supported it for the next few months and taken maybe a loss in the hopes that they could, right the ship, treat the people who bought in early, respect their money and respect their investment, and then maybe launch it as free-to-play in the new year. But in doing so, you would have pissed off, rightly, those people who bought in, because they would have said, well, we paid for it. What are you supposed to do?
Skins.
Exactly,
you can
right?
Get the Star Child skin.
Yeah.
It's exclusive to the person. I mean, there's ways to assuage and soothe the fallout of that, but I agree with you, it's not really an equitable solution when the game was initially marketed in such a way and sold on that initial basis.
Totally. So I don't know what they're going to do with it, but my thinking is get those refunds in now and then relaunch it, maybe as a free-to-play thing further on down the line. I can't see this thing coming back. If it comes back, again, I hope it does, with the same price point. I can't imagine they'll charge for it. I do think they'll retool some things, but overall, just a crazy bit of business, truth be told, and who knows what this means for Sony's live service games going forward. Hope they succeed, but strange.
One normal day of gaming.
Please.
One.
I was out at the pub last night. And then I was like, but Concord's happening. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Scott's not in tomorrow. Ewan, can you please help me do a news video?
And here I was.
And here we are.
To bask in the sadness.